Everyone in town saw a thief. No one saw the uniform beneath the rags. Until one man walked into the courtroom and turned the whole truth around. This is the story of Curtis Miller, war hero, forgotten. Until one voice spoke up and the world listened. Like, comment, honor restored, subscribe to help us bring hidden heroes back into the light. This is Unsung Valor Stories, where silence meets justice. Curtis Miller hadn't meant to cause a scene. All he wanted was something to eat. The small-town grocery store in Greenville, Alabama, wasn't the kind of place that usually made the news. It was the sort of place where cashiers knew your dog's name, and old folks sat out front drinking sweet tea and complaining about the weather. Curtis didn't fit anymore. Not since Afghanistan. Not since the night everything went black in Helmand Province. Now, at 66, Curtis lived in the back of a rusted pickup truck parked behind an abandoned gas station on the edge of town. His military pension had dried up after a paperwork dispute he never had the strength to fix. No family. No forwarding address. Just a man and a truck, surviving one day at a time. That morning had been colder than usual. His stomach cramped from 2 days without food. As he stepped into the grocery store, the warmth hit him like a wave. Fluorescent lights buzzed above. The smell of deli meat and fresh bread made his knees weak. Curtis walked slowly, deliberately, through the aisles. He avoided eye contact. He didn't want pity, just calories. In the back corner of the store was a wire rack labeled "Damaged Goods, 50% off." On it sat a plastic-wrapped sandwich, turkey slightly flattened but edible. Curtis stared at it for a moment. Then, looking over his shoulder, he slipped it into his coat and turned toward the door. He almost made it. "Hey!" a voice barked behind him. "You pay for that?" Curtis froze. A young store clerk named Josh stormed up, red-faced. "Empty your pockets." Curtis stood still, the sandwich half visible beneath his coat. He said nothing. "Security!" Josh shouted. "This guy's stealing!" Curtis looked down. "It was going in the trash tomorrow." "Still stealing," Josh snapped. The store manager arrived, followed by a local deputy who happened to be shopping nearby. In minutes, Curtis was in handcuffs, his weathered face pressed against the glass front door as the town he once protected watched in silence. At the sheriff's office, Curtis was processed like any other petty thief. Mugshot, fingerprints, holding cell. No one asked about the scars on his arm, or the old combat boots worn nearly to the sole. The official charge, misdemeanor theft of property, under $50. Bail was set, but no one posted it. He had no one left. The local paper ran a small blurb. Man arrested for shoplifting sandwich. No photo, just a line about a vagrant causing trouble. To most in town, it was forgettable. To Curtis, it was another bruise on a body already too tired to care. The court date came quickly. Municipal courtroom, wooden benches, a bored judge flipping through cases like receipts. Curtis sat at the defendant's table in a loaned suit jacket, one sleeve slightly torn. He looked smaller than his 6 feet. Hollowed out. The public defender assigned to his case hadn't asked many questions. "You stole it, right?" she'd asked. He had nodded. Case closed almost. But as the clerk read the charge aloud and the judge cleared his throat to issue sentencing, the courtroom door creaked open. A man stepped in, broad-shouldered, dressed in full military blues. Clean-shaven, medals gleaming. He moved with purpose. "I request to speak," he said, voice steady. The judge blinked. "And you are?" "Major Adam R. Claymore," the man said, "recipient of the Medal of Honor. And I'm here on behalf of the man you're about to sentence." Heads turned. The prosecutor lowered his papers. Even the bailiff leaned forward. Curtis turned slowly, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. He hadn't seen that face since 2009. The room held its breath. Major Adam Claymore didn't need permission to command attention. He had presence, the kind that only comes from surviving the worst the world can throw at you and walking back into it anyway. His Medal of Honor glinted under the fluorescent courtroom lights. The same medal most people only ever saw in museums. Judge Keller cleared his throat, struggling to reassert control. You are not on the docket, Major. This is a misdemeanor case. Are you claiming legal standing? Claymore stood tall. I am claiming moral standing. I'm here to speak on the record about Curtis Miller. The judge hesitated. Then, sensing the weight of the room, he gave a slow nod. Proceed, briefly. Claymore turned to face the courtroom, and for the first time, everyone truly looked at Curtis. Not as a criminal, not as a vagrant, but as someone connected to something bigger than they understood. Curtis Miller saved my life, Claymore began, in Helmand Province, June 22nd, 2009. Operation Iron Wall. He paused. The room remained silent. Our convoy was ambushed by insurgents. RPGs hit our lead vehicle. I was pinned beneath it. My squad was in disarray. Smoke, fire, bullets everywhere. I thought I was dead. He looked directly at Curtis. Until this man, this same man you've got in cuffs for a sandwich, dragged me through 30 meters of open fire with shrapnel in his leg. He covered me with his own body until we could be airlifted. The courtroom shifted uneasily. He didn't just save me, Claymore said, voice firm. He saved 5 others that day, at great personal cost. He never asked for recognition. He never demanded medals. But now he sits here, treated like a nobody. Judge Keller leaned forward. Major Claymore, are you certain this is the same man? Absolutely, Your Honor. I've spent 10 years trying to find him. Curtis, quiet for so long, finally spoke. Didn't think anyone was looking. Claymore smiled faintly. I never stopped. The judge called a recess. Conversations buzzed as the courtroom emptied. Outside in the hallway, Curtis and Claymore stood face to face for the first time in over a decade. You look different, Claymore said. Curtis smirked. So do you. They polish you up nice, huh? I thought you were dead, Claymore said, his voice low. I was. In a way, Curtis replied. They sat on the wooden bench outside the courtroom like old war buddies. No fanfare, just history stitched between every silence. Claymore reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. I brought your citation. They never delivered it. Curtis unfolded it slowly. His name, Sergeant Curtis L. Miller, typed in bold at the top. It was an official Army commendation for valor, signed and dated. Lost in the system, forgotten like him. I didn't save you for a piece of paper, Curtis said, and I know. That's why it means more. When court resumed, the tone had shifted. The prosecutor, previously casual, now looked uncomfortable. Your Honor, given the new testimony and military record, the state withdraws its motion to pursue this charge. Judge Keller nodded solemnly. Case dismissed. Mr. Miller, you are free to go. Curtis didn't rise immediately. It was as if the words hadn't fully reached him. Claymore stood and offered his hand. Curtis took it. The courtroom broke into quiet murmurs. A few people even clapped, unsure if they should. Outside, a small crowd of local reporters had gathered. Someone had tipped them off. One young journalist approached. Mr. Miller, how does it feel to be cleared? Curtis looked down at the citation in his hands. I didn't come here for justice, he said. I came here hungry. The story hit the regional news that night. Veteran arrested for stealing sandwich was actually war hero. It went viral by morning. By noon, the mayor of Greenville issued a public apology. By evening, a local restaurant offered Curtis a job. He politely declined. By the weekend, a GoFundMe started by a stranger reached over $200,000. And by the end of the week, a VA rep finally returned a call that had gone unanswered for 12 years. Curtis sat in the cab of his truck that night, parked under a sky full of stars. Claymore sat beside him, legs hanging out the passenger side. You could have let me rot in there, Curtis said. I could have, Claymore replied, but then I'd be forgetting the man who never forgot me. Curtis didn't respond. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. Curtis Miller had learned to live with silence. It had followed him home from Helmand, like a ghost in the back of his throat. It slept in his truck, rode in his bones, and echoed louder than any gunfire he ever heard. Silence kept him alive, but it also buried him. That silence was finally broken. In the days following the courtroom shockwave, Curtis's story ignited across every local news station, then spilled into national outlets. Veteran war hero arrested for stealing a sandwich became the headline no one could ignore. And yet, Curtis didn't change much. He still slept in his truck, still woke up before dawn, still drank coffee out of a thermos stained from years of use. But people started to see him. A woman from the VA knocked on his window one morning, clipboard in hand and tears in her eyes. "We're so sorry," she said. He grunted. "You the only one?" She laughed nervously. "Not anymore." By the end of the week, the GoFundMe account Claymore had reluctantly authorized surpassed $300,000. "It's not just money," Claymore said, reading the messages. "People are sending letters, thank you notes, kids drawing pictures of you as Captain America." Curtis rolled his eyes. Captain America didn't sleep in a Chevy. But he looked at the letters, some handwritten in crayon, some typed from far-off places with return addresses like Omaha, Nebraska, or Fargo, North Dakota, strangers who had seen a piece of themselves in him, veterans who'd slipped through cracks, sons of men like him. One note simply read, "I thought I didn't matter anymore. Now I think maybe I still do." Thank you, Curtis didn't say much, but he folded that note and kept it in his wallet. One afternoon, Claymore showed up with a change of clothes. "Pack your stuff," he said. Curtis blinked. "Where are we going?" "Not far, but not here." They drove to the edge of town, past the old mill, past the scrapyard, and into a small residential area built by a national veterans housing nonprofit. Curtis didn't say a word until they stopped in front of a modest one-bedroom unit with a small porch, a flag out front, and a nameplate by the door. "Miller, Curtis L." "What is this?" Curtis asked. "It's yours. No rent, no forms, just a key." Curtis didn't move, didn't reach for the door. He looked at the house like it might vanish if he blinked too long. "You earned it," Claymore said softly. "I didn't fight a war for handouts." Claymore nodded. "Then call it what it is. A nation finally catching up to the man it left behind." Curtis stepped out. The gravel crunched under his boots. He took the key in his hand. It felt unfamiliar, heavy. Inside, the house was simple. Bed, table, fridge, a clean bathroom, and an old radio that played classic blues. Curtis stood in the living room for a long time before he sat down, letting the silence settle. But this time, the silence felt different. This silence wasn't shame. It was peace. That weekend, Greenville hosted its annual Memorial Day ceremony. Usually it was modest, some flags, a few speeches, the same tired banner hung over the courthouse steps. But this year it was different. People packed the square. Local news cameras were set up. The mayor stood at the podium, fumbling nervously with a piece of paper. "This year we recognize a man who walked among us, unseen, who sacrificed more than we knew, who reminded us what duty and humility look like." Curtis sat off to the side, arms crossed, wearing a pressed shirt and clean jeans. He didn't want to be the center of attention, but Claymore made him come. A group of children sang, "God Bless America." Veterans stood and saluted, and then the mayor called Curtis to the stage. Curtis didn't move. "You should go," Claymore whispered. "I don't like stages." "You liked mine enough when you dragged me off it in a fireball." Curtis sighed. "Fair point." He walked to the stage slowly. The applause started soft, then swelled. Not loud, but heartfelt. Like people knew clapping wasn't enough. The mayor handed him a plaque. "For service rendered and honor restored." Curtis took it with both hands. He didn't say much. Just turned to the microphone, cleared his throat, and muttered, "Took y'all long enough?" The crowd laughed, and that was it. No speech, no grand moment, just a man who had finally been seen. Curtis Miller didn't become a celebrity, and he didn't want to. He still walked with a limp, still kept to himself, still sat on his porch at sunrise, sipping bitter coffee, as if waiting for something he couldn't name. But something had changed. Not in him, but around him. Neighbors waved. Kids asked to take photos with him. The man they once ignored at the edge of town now had a name people said with respect. He hated the word hero. To Curtis, heroes were the ones who didn't come back from Helmand, the ones whose families got flags instead of homecomings. He didn't consider himself one of them. He had survived, yes, but survival had cost him a life in silence. Until now. One morning, a letter arrived. It was from the Department of Defense. Inside was a formal acknowledgement of service, accompanied by a backdated commendation that had been buried in bureaucracy for over a decade. Alongside it was a check, retroactive pension benefits owed since 2011. Curtis didn't say much. He read the letter, folded it in half, and slid it into the drawer with the others. Money was nice. Paperwork meant closure. But none of it compared to the quiet dignity of sleeping indoors with a lock on the door. The next week, Claymore showed up again. He never knocked. "Pack your bag," he said, holding up 2 bus tickets. Curtis groaned. "Where now?" "D.C. You've got an appointment." "Appointment?" "With the Secretary of Veterans Affairs." Curtis narrowed his eyes. "You dragged me into a press stunt, I swear." Claymore raised a hand. "Just talk. That's all they want. You've become a symbol." "I'm not interested in being a damn symbol." "I know," Claymore said. "That's why it matters." They flew first class. Curtis hated it. When they arrived, cameras were waiting at Reagan National Airport, but Curtis kept his head down. Claymore ran interference like a seasoned handler. Inside the VA headquarters, Curtis was ushered into a boardroom filled with people in suits. He didn't recognize the politics, but he recognized the look in their eyes. It was the same one they used to give wounded soldiers on stretchers. Fear and guilt rolled into one. The secretary, a stern woman with steel gray hair and military posture, spoke first. "Mr. Miller, on behalf of this department and this nation, we apologize." Curtis nodded once. "What are you going to do about the next guy?" That silenced the room. "Because I got lucky," he continued. "Someone in a fancy uniform remembered my name." "What about the guys out there who don't have a Medal of Honor holder to vouch for them?" The secretary leaned forward. "You're right." And she meant it. That meeting sparked a new initiative. Operation Restore Dignity, a program dedicated to auditing lost veteran records and actively finding displaced servicemen and women across the country. Curtis didn't ask for credit, but they gave it anyway. Back home, life returned to something close to normal. He tended a small garden out back. He adopted an old German shepherd named Rusty from the shelter. The dog limped just like him. He joined a local veteran support group, not to talk, but to listen. And sometimes just his presence was enough. One day he found a young man sitting on his porch, early 20s, nervous, wearing an old ROTC sweatshirt. "You Miller?" the kid asked. Curtis nodded. "They said, you might understand. I got out last year and I don't know where to go." Curtis didn't answer, just opened the door and pointed to the second chair on the porch. "Sit," he said. That's how it began. Months later, a journalist asked him what changed his life. Curtis thought for a long time before answering. "A sandwich," he said, "and a man who remembered." That fall, Greenville renamed the old city park. The new sign read, "Curtis Miller Veterans Square, for those who served and were forgotten." Curtis attended the ceremony in his faded jacket, still stitched with an old army patch. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The town had already said everything for him. And when the sun dipped behind the trees and Rusty laid his head on Curtis's boot, the old soldier finally smiled. Not because of a medal, not because of the money, but because, for the first time in a long, long time, he had come home. Curtis never asked for medals. He didn't fight for fame. He fought for his brothers and for the man next to him in the dirt. And when the world forgot him, it took one moment of truth to bring him home. Because some heroes don't wear spotlights, they wear scars, and on Unsung Valor stories, we make sure they're never forgotten. Like, comment Honor Restored. Subscribe to help us bring hidden heroes back into the light. This is Unsung Valor Stories, where silence meets justice.